I passed your test. Fate has a twisted sense of humor, it seems. I suppose you think I'm some sort of monster. More so since I survived your ritual. You keep striking at me, and I just refuse to die decently. Yes, I know. You weren't the only one disappointed by the outcome. We must settle things between us somehow or other, or neither of us will get any work done. So, what will it be? Yes, well, you can thank me for that later. I don't know what concession you want from me, Warden. I expect my word will not satisfy you. I'd be delighted to. It is, however, a small camp. We could dig a moat down the middle of it, perhaps. It'll create some difficulty finding a place to pitch tents, I'm afraid. I think it's time we got to the point here. What do you want from me? My execution was all but arranged. If you'd wanted me dead, you could have had your wish at the lands meet. I assume, then, that you have something else in mind. That's the harsher punishment, certainly, and I can hardly argue that it's more than I deserve. I suppose I ought to be grateful. I have at least some chance now of putting right some of the things I have done. What I want? What an odd question. I want to ride back to Denerim and sit in the war room and find no empty chairs at the table. I want to lose, nothing else. I want a line clearly drawn that I can defend. I want an end to this war. All of this can rightly be called my fault. Whether or not you can do better remains to be seen. But if you can make this the end, Warden, I will follow you, I swear it. I never doubted that. We should speak no more of this at present. Time's wasting. I suppose you think I'm some sort of monster. More so since I survived your ritual. You keep striking at me, and I just refuse to die decently. Oh? What was all that nonsense with the Darkspawn blood and mages, then? A puppet show? It seems to me that magic has already failed. I'd recommend a sharp knife in the kidneys next time. Less impressive, but it gets the job done. I suppose it does lack the element of surprise. Well, what shall we do to settle things between us, then? Why should I? I'm a strategist by trade, after all. Should a fine plan be abandoned simply because it ends in my own demise? That seems like such a waste of a good idea. So what is it you think you can have me do, then, that will be so much worse than death? Is that punishment meant for me or for you? And just like that, we're allies. I can't imagine it's so simple. Indeed, I'd almost forgotten that. Thank you for the reminder. I suppose you think I'm some sort of monster. More so since I survived your ritual. You keep striking at me, and I just refuse to die decently. Ah, now there's the venom I expected. Well, is that it? Surely you've more to say to me than that. When you run out of common insults, you can try Elven. I won't understand them, but I promise to be offended nonetheless. Is that the best you have? I'm disappointed. It doesn't even offend me because it happens to be true. I've killed enough men now with my own hands or by command that they're beyond counting. Honestly, Elf, do you think that, among all my crimes, is the one that keeps me up at night? It's a bit egotistical of you, don't you think? The plight of a few dozen elves, in the face of all the hundreds who died at Ostagar, the countless others fighting the civil war that followed, seems irrelevant. And because you stopped it, the army we have to face the Blight is a third the size it should be. And many more elves wait in the alienage, defenseless for the Darkspawn to reach them. Which fate is worse, I wonder, to live as a slave, or to die without hope in the alienage? But the truth of things hardly matters now. You've won. You can decide whatever you like about my guilt. Of course not, I'm a soldier. Conscience has no place in war.
Because it seemed necessary at the time. Got people out of the most indefensible part of the city and put money in the coffers at the same time. The whole kingdom is about to be lost. What does principle matter now?
By all means, tell me again how I murdered Cailan. I find the topic inexhaustibly fascinating. There is no possibility, of course, that Cailan's poor judgment in leading the charge against my advice caused his death. Because he fell in battle, his part in the massacre at Ostagar must be excused, and because I survived, all responsibility must fall to me. Oh! Now that actually struck a glancing blow. Good work. And now what? Am I to be some trophy of your victory? The defeated enemy you drag about on a leash wherever you go? Or have you some worse fate in mind for me? Or what? You'll kill me? Go ahead. The joining was my death sentence anyway. It's hardly my fault that it failed to produce the desired result, Warden. I assure you, it's foremost on my mind. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised at your success. You beat me. Perhaps you can do this after all. It hardly matters now. I've certainly been mistaken about you before. Hate doesn't describe it. I've seen painted, masked lords beat an old farmer to death with riding crops. To this day, I don't know why. Is that hate? I saw good, sensible men fight armored chevaliers with nothing. No weapons, no armies, not even hope of success to see the occupation end. Is that hate? You won't believe me when I tell you this, but it doesn't matter. I never fought because I hated Loghain. This was for Maric and for Eldon. What does that matter? He was my king. More importantly, he was my friend. Death doesn't end that. I didn't want to start a war, I wanted to stop one. I failed. So I suppose my intentions don't amount to much. The past is always with us. It's in our bones and our blood, and we wear it on our skin. You can think otherwise, but you'll never get far without it. No, it doesn't. I failed. Lives were in my hands, and I failed. Nothing excuses that. I made a tactical error. I suppose that depends on how much of the kingdom was left by then. Once the border was secure, the army would have regrouped to push back the Darkspawn in the south. It's easy to say now. When chevaliers were massing on our doorstep, things were a little less clear. We couldn't, especially after Ostagar. It wasn't an ideal plan, but it seemed necessary at the time. There was never any question in my mind that Anora would remain on the throne. After all, who else was there? Maric had no brothers or sisters. Most of the Therans were publicly hung by Megran when he took power. In any case, there's no use discussing this. We have much work left to do. Did you want something? Anora always did have a flair for the dramatic. She could have been a bard. I didn't say that. Howe suggested the possibility. I rejected it, of course. Undoubtedly, that discussion was the inspiration for her story. Anora is a politician at heart. There's one thing she knows. It's how to move people. Well, I'm sure having you come to her rescue gave Anora no small amount of pleasure. So far as anyone could tell, she was the undisputed monarch of the whole world. She'd fall, skin her knees, and command them to stop stinging. It may have worked, too. She bleeds just like anyone. Or are you surprised that my daughter ever fell down? I suppose she was. It's the peculiar joy of parents to be terrorized by their children, however. If you're expecting some particular insight into my daughter's character, I'm afraid I'm probably not the best source. I'm hardly impartial. You think so?
I'm not certain of that myself.
Gwaren sits in between the Brazilian forest and the sea. It's far from the old Tevinter roads. The village by our keep was never even as big as Redcliffe. There are always a few children around. Charcoal burners, sons and daughters mostly, or the children of servants. They formed into noisy gangs in the courtyard for their games. But Anora never joined them. I don't know. Children are in some ways vicious animals, forming packs and defending them from outsiders. Anora was always an outsider. Perhaps it was. She read a great deal. She followed her mother like a shadow about the gardens. She practiced archery and sword play. She was never idle. Because it was vacant, and though it's off the trade routes close to Denerim, it was a good place for children to grow up. Solitude isn't terrible, you know. She had a free reign over the woods. Cailan. He was a bit younger than she was, but Anora would lead him about the palace like a puppy on a leash, deep in adventures together. I believe the two of them once fought an army of ogres in the wine cellar. That was their explanation for all the broken bottles, anyway. Anora is a good queen. She has been for 5 years now. Whatever she might think, I never took power from Anora. She may have felt threatened, but I most pointedly did not remove her from the throne. In all seriousness, Anora is formidable. You should know that by now. I'm not a seer. If I could predict the future, I wouldn't be here now. They always have before. Few among the nobles have ever been under any illusions as to who really held power in Denerim. No one is born wise. We only get that way by enduring. Anora is strong enough to endure. She may make a few mistakes along the way, but she'll survive them. But this is not really the time or place to discuss my daughter. We have work to do. Do you want something? I suppose I have a moment. He was my friend. If he'd wanted to conquer the Fade, I would have led the charge. I was hunting, well, poaching, to be entirely honest, when a boy my own age came stumbling out of the woods. He was so dirty, you'd have thought he'd been dug up out of the ground. The traitorous bootlickers who'd just murdered the Queen, though I didn't know it at the time. Of course not. I had no idea who he was. He gave me a made-up name, told me he was fleeing Orlesians. He was bloody, exhausted, and obviously being hunted. I offered to take him to my father's camp. That's a story for another time, I'm afraid. I've gone on too long as it is. There are men who inspire such devotion that everyone around would lay down their lives for him. And there are men who would come and go from this world, and no one notes it. What makes them so? Your guess is as good as mine. Maric was remarkable. That's all I can say of him. He nearly did. Maric was never one to avoid his duty, and given his preference, he would have acknowledged his son no matter the circumstance. But he had more than his honor to think of. It would have ruined Rowan, after all. She'd be reduced to a concubine in the eyes of our neighbors, and put Cailan's status as heir in question. So Maric made the hard choice. Eamon offered to raise the boy, and that was that. What do you think would have become of Alistair if Maric had claimed him? He would have been the bastard prince, and a continual reminder to Rowan of Maric's infidelity. At least with Eamon, Alistair had a childhood. Eamon is a shrewd man. He'll be advising the boy. They'll do all right, I suppose. He had no education in governing, politics, or diplomacy. And though I know you don't wish to hear this, he doesn't strike me as a talented amateur. Your friend may get good advice from Eamon, but he's weak. All the bands know it. You can see them. A pack of wild dogs waiting for a bone. The first chance they get,
They'll pry concessions out of him. They'll pick at the throne until it's only a gilded chair with no power or authority at all. Anora, as you may have already noticed, is clever enough to manipulate the bands. She can make alliances and play them against one another to get what she wants. Because Eamon, for all his merits, is a conservative man. He believes in tradition and inheritance, and would never see the daughter of a freeholder, however gifted, in power. No? You might want to wonder then how a blood mage ended up employed by his household. How likely was it that only Isolde was aware of Connor's gift? Eamon knew, and he allowed it to be hushed up so the boy could remain heir. Better that than allow the Arling to go to his childless younger brother, only to pass out of the hands of the Gwaren family altogether. I was a Tyran, but my father was a farmer, as was his father and all the generations of McTeers that history remembers. And Celia, my wife, was a cabinet maker's daughter. Hardly a royal pedigree. This discussion profits no one. I may be wrong. I will certainly hope so. One life. After all this trouble, it seems like such a small thing to give up to see this land safe, doesn't it? You think so? Suppose you've never been a soldier. The currency of war is life. You pay it, and pray that the outcome is worthwhile. And if there isn't, do we refuse to accept the solution because it doesn't suit us? There's much more at stake than our own lives. And should it come to that... You think so, do you? Curiously, it's harder to send another man to die. It's easy to die for your cause. Sometimes men do it without even knowing. It's so much harder to live for it, bearing the weight of the dead. You'll have to. You're commanding the armies you've raised, aren't you? Well, you better start, then. To command an army, you have to be close enough to your men to know what you're risking, and still think of them as tools that might need to be thrown away. Oh, everyone has a strategy for dealing with it. Most of the generals I've known took to drink. Some took to religion. It's a matter of personal choice, I suppose. You don't need my advice. You'll figure it out on your own. I've wondered that myself, from time to time. However you may feel about it, though, you are in command. You better learn to accept the consequences. Wait until after the battle. There's no use trying to cope with what hasn't happened yet. And what does your Antivan think of that? You have a life, yet don't be in a hurry to give it up. Not when there are alternatives. If anyone should make this sacrifice, it ought to be me. Maker knows I have enough to atone for. Glory? No. But forgiveness? Perhaps. There is, however, no use worrying about what may be. We'll have to wait and see what comes.